Hi, it's Josh Goldberg here. In today's video, I'm going to briefly discuss a very important fundamental point in how to deal with splitting, which is a defense mechanism of the borderline person. So for those of you who aren't familiar with splitting, splitting is a defense mechanism of the borderline person where they will gain omnipotent control over a situation by painting the external environment as a bad, negative place. So this normally comes with projective identification, which means that when the borderline person splits on you, they will project a negative, malicious identity onto you as part of their split. And you might be asking yourself, how is this a defense mechanism when they're basically attacking me, if they're accusing me, if they're blaming me, and if they're painting me as a bad person? And the answer is omnipotent control gives the borderline person the illusion that they are safe and that they have the power and that they have the upper hand, and that gives them a feeling of safety and security. It's a very primitive defense mechanism which is formed in childhood. And basically, if the borderline person, when they split and they're deciding that the world is a bad place and they're deciding that you're a bad person, it gives them the safety and the comfort of having that control of knowing what's going on and not feeling that intense abandonment anxiety and feeling unsafe and feeling anxious. So omnipotent control causes these preemptive strikes known as splitting. And that's really the key here, is the preemptiveness. The borderline person will resort to making themselves into the victim and making you into the perpetrator in order to give themselves the false sense of safety and comfort in having that omnipotent control. So when the BPD person splits and now they're turning against you, it's very important at this immediate point to also switch and to change your approach to the situation. If you carry on with how you would normally relate in a relationship with someone, it will only be hurtful and upsetting to you, and your reactions will only cause a situation to spiral even further, and it will perpetuate the BPD person's trauma, creating this cycle of hopelessness. So it's very important when the BPD person is turning against you and they're splitting on you to change your approach. Now, what you change your approach into is a totally separate discussion. There are multiple different techniques to use to effectively manage a borderline person if they're splitting on you. And the approach that you would take on is heavily dependent on a number of different factors. For example, is the BPD person actively engaging in healing or not? Where are they up to when they're healing? What you are able to do, and so on. So there are a number of different approaches, and this is what I help people with, is adapting an effective approach in dealing with the borderline person's trauma triggers and their splitting, so that the situation can be managed effectively and not spiral down into a horrible situation and leave you feeling drained, exhausted, hurt, and disrupting your life too much. So this is very important. Remember, when the BPD person splits and they turn you into the enemy and they're looking through a negative lens at you now and the world, you also have to change your approach. And that particular approach is something that needs to be discussed and it needs to be worked on. And this is what I help people with in managing these types of trauma triggers. So if you're finding yourself on the receiving end of splitting, projective identification, projection, and you notice that your partner, they have trauma triggers and they become omnipotent, which means that they try and control situations to give themselves the upper hand, please feel free to reach out. It's very difficult to deal with splitting and projective identification by yourself.